Today we're going to talk about business, and we have the Senior Vice President of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Evelyn Barahona. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Daisy. Thank you so much for having me here.
Telling me a little bit about the story of the chamber.
Sure. So we are the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and our organization looks to, represent the interests of 5 million Hispanic businesses in the country.
Mhm.
And, the first Hispanic chamber noted was back in the 1920s when there was a lot of issues with like Mexican and American businesses. And a lot of businesses felt that their representation in terms of business owners was not being well represented in the United States. And so
Mhm.
over time, the organization grew and we realized years later that we needed to have a concentrated body that could represent the interests of all Hispanic businesses across the country, because we were finding that we were a growing business and growing cohort, and that's how the United States Hispanic business was born. And since then, what we actually do is we do advocacy and policy. So we work with legislators across the country. And
Uh-huh.
anytime, for example, you might have heard the infrastructure bill. We look to make sure that what does that mean for our Hispanic business community? Because
Yes.
in theory, it sounds terrific, and you'll hear things about broadband, and we're going to, increase this, we're going to do that, we're going to get into technology. Our role is to translate that and figure out how our Hispanic business is going to get access to grants, opportunities, and contracts. And so that's the main concentration. And then my work, I oversee the foundation, which is the 501c3, and we're
Mhm.
responsible to make the mission of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce come to life with programs and initiatives that supports both over 260 Hispanic chambers across the country and Hispanic business enterprises in partnership with corporations and philanthropy and foundations that really see the Hispanic community as a key force in the economic development of this country.
Fantastic. And we're growing. We are the number one minority right now across the whole country. And it's so important that we are informed, that we're educated, and that we are working together. This is in Washington, D.C. specifically, but you connect with the different chambers across the country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the richness of the work that we do, and we take a great pride, and we see this as a huge responsibility because all over the country, there's Hispanic chambers looking to support their local businesses.
Mhm.
And really, when we look at the entrepreneurship landscape, it's incredible that people don't realize that we contribute as a community. This is both business and Hispanics purchasing power, about $3.2 trillion to the American economy, the GDP, the gross domestic product. And I think for Hispanic business, they contribute over $800 billion. And this is with, challenges of accessing opportunities, which is our main role. Our role is to make sure that any grants, opportunities, and contracts, any systemic issues are being, dissuaded, because we know that if we're able to contribute 3.2 trillion, can you imagine if we're able to provide access to businesses,
Mhm.
what that can do for our families, our community, and the country?
Exactly. A good thing that you said the country, because sometimes people think, oh, this is only for the Hispanic community. We
No.
are the workforce in many cases, in many states. We are the workforce of that state. We are providing employment. We are working with the leadership in that state. So it is important that we don't see, they don't see us as, oh, this is for the Hispanics. No, no, it's for the future of the country. The landscape of America is changing rapidly, and we need to understand that this is for the whole country, that we are able to inform the Hispanic community, create opportunities for them. So it's very important that we keep always that in mind. This is for the whole United States of America. Tell me a little bit about your story.
Oh, sure. So I don't know where you want to start. So maybe I'll start a little bit at the beginning. But so I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, and our organization's headquartered in DC. But I'm originally from San Francisco, California. That's where I was born and raised. And my parents are originally from El Salvador. So I grew up bicultural, bilingual. And looking back, it's such a blessing. I can't emphasize enough the ability to be bicultural and bilingual, because it helped me so much later on in life. And then I transitioned and headed out to Boston for undergrad. And this is where I came to the East Coast, did a degree in international business and finance, and had the opportunity to also study a third language because of Spanish. I was able to pick up French and go to a French management school.
Wow.
And to be honest with you, if it wasn't for the Spanish, I don't know if I would have survived that business management program, because the language acquisition of French is very challenging, and having that the Spanish root helped me tremendously and everything. And so in the beginning of my career, I started in finance and investment management for many years, and then realized that it wasn't for me. And as I was trying to figure out what my next step was, I decided to work for a social enterprise company that believed in adding value in the healthcare system and health equity through
Mm-hmm.
an e-learning program. And so I worked a lot in development, just working and partnering with the healthcare system on how to make sure that they had this program, which is an e-learning platform to educate both the medical professions and those managing hospitals on being more culturally competent, because we were
Mm-hmm.
finding there were a lot of gaps, especially in immigrant communities when it came to healthcare.
Wow.
And then,
Yes.
yeah, and then from there, I actually ended up working at the Boston Chamber of Commerce. So that's where I got a little bit of my preview of the Chamber of Commerce world. And it was incredible because this is like an organization that is the center of the city of Boston, of getting all the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and smaller in the Boston area. And so I was able to see sort of the landscape of what that looked on the regional perspective, but then moved toward philanthropy. And it was more as a consultant. I ended up hopping on for a project at the Boston Foundation after Hurricane Maria for the Massachusetts
Uh-huh.
United Puerto Rico Fund, and
Uh-huh.
worked there with the many stakeholders on trying to figure out, okay, we were able to fundraise $4 million to support these efforts. And the project was about 2 years. And in those 2 years, I also got recruited by the Boston Foundation to join their main organization in the donor services. So I ended up working also with philanthropists that had donor advised funds at the Boston Foundation, and understanding that there are people, incredible people that have resources that really want to do the right thing and philanthropy. And then later on, ended up getting promoted to run the first philanthropic fund focused on Latinos called the Latino Equity Fund.
Ooh, okay. So you have a whole journey to this position that you have now with as a senior vice president. What are we doing locally? What are we doing right? And what we can do better locally? Because sometimes we can get disconnected with what's happening with, the big boys, the big where the money is, with the big grants. What are we doing right, and where we can improve?
Yeah, so I think like as a community, people always think that philanthropy is for people that are wealthy, that have
Mm-hmm.
donor advised funds. But to be quite honest with you, just at a local level and even as a community level, we're all philanthropists. If you've helped your tia, primos, and so forth, and we all practice philanthropy in smaller ways that we don't use that word, but that's
Uh-huh.
essentially what it is. Because philanthropy is, helping your fellow human being, a fellow, it's humankind. And I think that like sometimes people overthink it and think, oh, I can't give, to this organization because I don't have the funds. But it really depends where you put your attention and your money. And so for me, I participate in a lot of community organizations as a board member, and there's a giving aspect to it. And I think that sometimes you have to wrap your head around that you can start giving, and sometimes it's small, and maybe it's a matter of budgeting, right? Because I think the way you manage your money sometimes is the same way as you manage your time. Like if you pay attention, you can afford to give back to things that you care most about. And sometimes it might be modest because we do it with family. Like, I've seen it in my own family. If a family member perhaps, is having a challenging time, I've seen family members pay the mortgage 2 months and that type of thing. And so sometimes I think it's translating. And then I think as professionals, especially if you have generations that are in roles where they're making incomes that they never imagined that could make, I think sometimes there's a bit of guilt for having
Yes.
that. And I think you need
Mm.
to transmute that guilt into what is my privilege and opportunity to give back in a way that makes sense, and not out of guilt, but out of a passion, out of, you're being compelled to give. So I think sometimes locally we can give and give all the time. Sometimes we give our time if it's not money. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's this material thing. So I think, oftentimes people are like, oh, I'm not rich, I'm not going to give. And it's like, no, we're rich in many other ways. And I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
matter where you put your attention and also recognizing that your time and what you give in exchange is just as valuable as someone writing a big check.
Yeah, that's so important to understand. Sometimes we go to these big fun, events, and we see a huge company because I work with the education network, and so I see a lot, uh, people that are very generous. And sometimes when you see somebody like, I'm giving you 3, 4, 5 million dollars for education, for this and that can be intimidated for a small business. They feel maybe that's not my place, but not compare yourself with huge corporations that maybe they have their own journey. And sometimes we have to be careful with that. And something else that I want to add, sometimes I feel, and I talk about myself because I seen it in the community, that this is not like home. We're still thinking about, okay, when I go back. That does sometimes doesn't happen. Your kids are growing up here. You're doing business in the United States. This is home. How can we translate that into the DNA of our community? This is home too. You're not betraying anybody by saying that this is home. Do you see that in your network?
Oh my God, I see it in my own family. But in terms of our network, certainly. And I think that there is a sense of place, right? You never forget the place you were born and raised, where your values were developed. But I do think that sometimes home is where the heart is. And if your heart is here, it's okay to be a double citizen, so to speak, like spiritually and
Mhm.
emotionally, that
Yes.
it's not one or the other. And the reality is, especially in our community, many of us come from countries that have changed that. And I'll give an example. In the case of my mother, she was born and raised in El Salvador. And I could tell growing up that it always felt like she had one foot outside this country. And it's
Yes.
just the things she would say. And I remember we would go back and visit family, and she would say, wow, the country has changed so much, because in her mind, she was thinking of an El Salvador that was so close and dear to her heart, that
Hmm.
raised her during a period. And then going back to a country and realizing, oh, I feel like a stranger in my own land. And I
Yes.
think that is something that a lot of people in our community grapple with, especially those that were born outside the United States. But I
Hmm.
think one way to reconcile is that you have an amazing opportunity to bring that the best parts of your home in a country that was made of immigrants. And what
Yes.
better way to make that impact? And I think that I can't speak from direct experience, but just from what I've seen in our community, my family, that doesn't go away, but I think there are ways to keep it alive, even if
Hmm.
the country has changed, right? That, the country that you think of home is the nostalgia, but it's not the current reality. And so
Yes.
I think it's like, how do you keep those beautiful memories alive and also realize I'm presently here? What can I do to bring my
Exactly.
culture, right?
Yes, and embrace this country. This is our country. We vote here. We make money here. We send our children to schools. We need to know what's going on in our locally. Who is the mayor? Who is the governor? Who is the person who is right next? So it's so important that we understand that. I always talk to our community about this. This is home too. And you're not betraying anybody by saying, who is my governor? Who is my mayor? Who is the person in charge of my community? Who is my commissioner? The person who knows about my issues with my business. It's so important to understand that. And one other thing I want to talk about, yeah, to finish the whole interview, because I know your time is precious. Latina women. Sometimes we don't consider, oh my God, that's another topic, because sometimes we're doing business and we are still like, we do go low profile, low key. We just, oh, I have a little thing going on here, just yo vendo arepas, yo vendo esto. They don't see, and I'm not going to talk for everybody because there's a lot of powerful business entrepreneurs, business people, but how do you see that for the Latina women in the United States, how we can step up their game?
Oh my God. I'm so happy you brought this up, Daisy, because something to note for your audience is that Latina businesses are growing 6 times the rate in the entrepreneurship space in the United States compared to any other entrepreneurship group. And so when you put those numbers into perspective, you have an amazing group of Latina women literally being heads of household, literally creating businesses. And I think that one of the things that we've seen in our data and in our work is that, sometimes not all of them, but there are a few that are doing it because of their family, right? They're
Mm,
wanting to provide. So there's respect for that. But there's also an opportunity to be like, well, beyond that, what if you can scale if that's where you want to go? There are a lot of resources. And I think for us at the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, we've been noting that, and we haven't been the only ones. There are people tracking that they're seeing in entrepreneurship numbers that Latinas are opening business at 6 times the rate.
wow.
That's incredible, right? And then when we look at the back data, it's like, okay, how many of them are scaling and growing? And there's a huge gap there. But what I
Mm,
would say is that, like anything in life, everything starts with a mindset. And I
mhm.
think that if you have the fuel and the hunger to even start a business, it's time to also update how are you going to see yourself grow your business, because the way you grow your business is the way you grow as a human being. You have to
Wow.
have confidence in yourself, you have
Mhm.
to believe in yourself, and sometimes you have to make a bet. And I do see sometimes what we've noted, and we're trying to work on this on our organization, is what are the support systems that these Latina entrepreneurs need, because the things that they're able to do is mind boggling. And imagine if we're able to provide them the tools, the resources, the support, but also making sure that you're checking your mindset, because the way you manage your mindset, people don't become $1 billion companies or multi-million-dollar companies just like that. It starts with, like, I have this belief that I believe that my whatever I'm selling, creating, or adding value in my business, like there is something they're trying to fulfill, but sometimes, we can hold ourselves back with narratives. So I would
Yes.
say, more importantly, it's like checking your narrative. Like, what is your mindset? Like, are there any self-limiting beliefs that you're saying to yourself
Mhm.
that might be playing out in your business, right? Because like you mentioned this, like a repa lady, right? I've seen people that might have taken an arepa concept and all of a sudden been like, you know what, I want to franchise this. I want to have
Yes.
arepa stores in
Exactly.
every corner. And it takes that kind of drive and also checking of like what's going on under the hood to think that way. And so I think oftentimes in our culture, we come from an amazing culture, right? We like the Latino collective, regardless of which country you're from, it's not surprising to find people that love their family, want to give back. They're the best networkers, right? They're like really great communicators and collaborators. If you hear from someone and say, "Oh, I need this," and you're in conversation, people like activate themselves. Like, you know what? I'll connect you with so and so.
Yes.
And so I think we have that. But I also think for Latina women, sometimes there is, like this other narrative going on in our culture of
Mhm.
being like, oh, I don't want to stand out too much, right? Because there's the whole thing of teniendo
Yes.
humildad, but sometimes
Yes.
it's taken too far. And I think having humility is great, but in this country, it's also great to state facts of what you can do well and not
Yes.
feel embarrassed about it. And I
And
think
the
that that is a piece that sometimes holds back a lot of Latinas, because we have that, that voice in
yes.
our head like, oh, don't be presumida, don't be too
Mhm.
much.
Or
And
ambitious, or the word
yeah,
ambitious.
yeah,
It could be perceived as a negative connotation. Oh, I'm ambitious. No, that's good that you're ambitious, that you
yeah.
want to excel.
So I think we need to flip that narrative,
Mhm.
because sometimes it gets embedded in many of our cultures and you don't even realize it. And you have to also talk back to it and say, okay, do I have humility, but can I also create this plan where I want to make $5 million? Why? Because, like it's almost like you have to go back to like, what are the facts? Right. And then am I doing it with humility to balance that out? Because I think the
I love it.
humility piece is almost like the piece to anchor us. And oftentimes I think the thermo humility has gone too far, to the point that people are like shrinking and disappearing
Yeah.
in an effort to be like have humility.
And they're
And
looking for evidence, not to, okay, it's not going to work because this and
yeah,
this and this. And they're looking, in my case, and I'm a business person too, as We do a lot of solopreneur. We think we can do it all. We change hats, and we have to be careful with that. That's one of the things that I've been working on as a businesswoman, as a Latina bilingual professional, is that the fact that I've noticed that we work by ourselves. We are doing our things over here, and it's hard to grow when you're trying to do everything, and you just stay in within your network. And also mentorship, you need to find people around you, and I also work on that a lot of time. Just to have you here, just to be the interaction with you, it takes my mentality, my mindset to the next level. You have to interact. It's not like you're going to be hanging out all the time with people. It's just the interaction, reading YouTube videos with people that can take you to the next level. You need that. We need that as a Latina to take us to the next opportunity. So I think that's one of the things that as women, Latina, bilingual professionals, we need to wake up to understand that we cannot do it alone. And that's why I decided to interview you, to talk to you about it. And I'm so grateful that you were here today. Do you want to leave a final message for the whole country? Because where's the future of the Hispanic business? We are growing, and
We are growing.
we need people like you.
I would say if I had a message for all the Latinos in the United States, it would be this: do not be afraid to exercise your power, because we all have power. As a community, we have a purchasing power of 3.2 trillion. As an individual, we have the ability to exercise our power through voting, being engaged in your local, state, whatever politics, in your purchasing power, buying from Latino-owned businesses to support Latino-owned businesses, and also, I would say, voting with your purse, meaning support the businesses that support you. Look at Bad Bunny. Look, like, he did not change who he was to assimilate to what was believed to be the American system of music. He created a new market. And he created because he was authentic, and he knew that there were Latinos here that would love his music. And I think oftentimes we forget that we have power and we don't exercise it. And you know what? You do not add value to anyone by being small. I think that as Latinos, we have this culture, we have these values, and I would love to see Latinos just take more ownership of that and support one another. And then more importantly, especially for Latina and Latino businesses, go to your local chambers, go to your local Hispanic chambers. Like you met Daisy, you mentioned something. You can't do it all. And when you're in a business, at some point, in order for you to grow, you have to build a team. And sometimes it starts with consultants, but in order to do that, you have to access knowledge and resources, and local Hispanic businesses have that. And then local Hispanic businesses are also plugged into the USHCC, and we're able to provide those opportunities at a regional level as well. And so if I had a message for everyone, it would be like, do not be afraid to, expand your network. Like, go after the knowledge. And the way you go after the knowledge is like listening to like your podcasts like this, going to events where you can learn and build your resources, because no one succeeds alone. And especially in our community that we're very collaborative, people want to help you. Let people help you. So because that way you can, really, really build your career and your business, but no one does it alone. And so just keep that in mind, because oftentimes there's this myth that it's like, oh, people like created their business. It was all about, no, that's not true. It's a network. There were people rooting for them. There were mentors. There were coaches. There were people on the sidelines that were like, hey, I don't know this person, but I believe in them, and I'm going to like connect them to so-and-so. And don't be afraid to connect with people. I do it all the time. If I see someone and I'm just like, I would love to learn and be in this person's orbit, I reach out to them. The worst thing that they can do is not respond. And guess what? That's okay.
Exactly. Well, I think that will be the perfect message to finish this interview. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't do it alone. You don't have to do it alone. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Daisy. I really, very, very much